immediate.
I call Lewis Sewell.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to contribute to this committee stage debate of the Social Security Extension of Young Person Services and Remedial Matters Amendment Bill, and I specifically want to speak to my colleague Carmel Sepalone's supplementary order paper, which wants to amend Section 170, so this is clause 27A, to essentially ensure that parents are able to stay at home with their child until that child is 3 years of age. Currently, when a young person is receiving the youth support payment, the obligation for that young person is to be enrolled in or available for a full-time course of secondary or tertiary or approved work-based learning from when their child is 6 months old. And so the proposition that my colleague Carmel Sepalone is bringing to the House, that actually that requirement should only be on that young person receiving a youth support payment when their baby is 3 years old. And our rationale for that particular age is actually really clear and based on evidence, Mr. Chair. And that evidence comes from UNICEF, where research was clear about under 3-year-olds benefiting from being looked after at home. And why is it important for our babies to be looked after at home? Well, it's really important for our babies to form an attachment with a particular person. And that particular person is normally the mum. And what that attachment does for that young child is to enable them to manage their emotions, their feelings, their bodies, and also to cope with stress, which enables them to manage themselves and actually forms the resiliency that that young child needs to take throughout life. So the irony of this particular piece of legislation is that this is all about young parents, but in the process of forcing young parents back into further education, training or work, we're actually disadvantaging their children. And what we should be looking at is how best to look after our most vulnerable, smallest and tenderest members of society, and they are actually the children of young people who find themselves in a circumstance where they're needing the support of the state. So I'm asking the Minister to specifically address the issue in the current Act, which says that when your child is 6 months old, you have to look for a full-time course of secondary, tertiary or approved work-based learning. Where is the evidence that actually that's going to benefit the child of the young person? Because from our perspective, that should be one of the critical factors in this legislation. Because if we are really wanting to help that young person, it's that young person to get in a position, the best position possible, to look after their children. And we would contend that the best support we should be giving that young parent is to be the best parent they can be. And to be the best parent you can be means actually staying at home with your child until they're 3 years of age, so that they are taught skills about how you be a good parent. A lot of people don't know. This isn't just teenage parents, actually, Minister. This is all parents. How do you become a good parent? How do you read to your children? How do you interact with your child? How do you bathe them? You know, it's those, we believe, skills and opportunities that this government and our government should be facilitating for our young parents, as opposed to forcing them back into education, away from their child. And I think it's really narrow-minded and punitive to force those young parents into a situation where they are not with their children and actually doing what we believe they should be doing, which is bonding with their children. This is reinforced, Mr Chair, by a piece of research titled Children's Elevated Cortisol Levels in Daycare, Mr Chair, a review and meta-analysis. It's a piece of research that came out in 2006 by Vermeer and Van Eisendoorn. But what they did, this is another piece of research where they collected research from a whole lot of people that had looked at the cost-benefit to the child of children being in a daycare setting and not with their parent. And the context of this research actually speaks to modern living, because there are a lot of parents today who, for a number of reasons, actually do have to go back to work. And so we understand that ultimately it then becomes a choice for parents in certain circumstances to use daycare as a means for them to integrate back into the workforce. And the interesting thing, if we look at some research from the UK, in 1981, 24% of women were back to work within a year of childbirth. In 2001, that figure had increased to 67% of women who were back to work within a year. And that increased to 76% of women who were back to work when the child was aged between 12 and 18 months. So daycare does have a place in our society, but I guess the context of the research has highlighted that the effect of daycare attendance on cortisol excretion was especially notable in children younger than 36 months. And it actually said because of their stressful interactions in a group setting, which makes it all the more vital to ensure that our children, our most precious babies, the building blocks of any society, actually have an opportunity to spend the first 3 years of their lives bonding with their primary caregiver, their parent. And so I would ask the Minister to seriously consider this supplementary order paper by my colleague Carmel Sepuloni. I think it is based around an age where there is very good evidence about how we best support young mothers from disadvantaged backgrounds, because the other part of the evidence from the research that I quoted earlier was that actually children from middle-class families do benefit from going to daycare. We're not talking about children from middle-class families, we're talking about children who are receiving the youth support payment and the obligations that the state wants to place on those young parents to go back to education full-time, and I believe at the expense of their children. And those children, I would have thought we should be prioritising and doing as much as possible to ensure, as the Minister said, they're enrolled with the primary health organisation, that they're enrolled or on a pathway to ensuring that they're meeting all the developmental steps through Plunkett, that we're supporting those parents to be the best parents that they can be. And what I see from this piece of legislation is that it's incredibly narrow-minded and isn't even looking at the next generation of New Zealand children. And so I would hope that the debate that we're having in the House actually isn't falling on deaf ears, it's actually falling on ears that want to do what's best, not only for the young people who find themselves parents early in life, but also the children of those young parents. And we would do everything in our power to make sure that they're not going to be the next generation of beneficiaries. And so I implore this House to debate further the merits of my colleague Carmel Sepuloni's supplementary order paper. I think a lot of thought was put into that supplementary order paper. The ages haven't been plucked out of nowhere. I think the evidence is really clear, and I think this is a real test of the commitment that this government has to young people, because otherwise it just ends up being about, like everyone else has said previously, about the money, about saving money, about, I guess, limiting the liability on the state. And it isn't about investment, which we've heard so much about from particularly my colleague Alfred Nuttall tonight. So I would have thought an investment approach would have ensured that we are concerned about the children of young parents, and we would be doing everything that we can to make sure they had a secure attachment with their parent, that their parent was in the best position to be the best parent that they could be.
Poto Williams.
Chair,